What's up, guys? Today we're going to look at a poem, and this one's a bit longer, so I'm going to read a few stanzas and then stop to talk about our activity for the day before I do the whole thing. Now, you may have seen The Raven before in a textbook or on a TV show. I remember when I was a kid, I saw this on Animaniacs, or maybe it was Tiny Toons, one of those Warner Brothers shows in the 90s. So let's take a look here. Once upon a midnight dreary, while I pondered weak and weary over many a quaint and curious volume of forgotten lore, while I nodded, nearly napping, suddenly there came a tapping, as of someone gently rapping at my chamber door. "'Tis some visitor," I muttered, tapping at my chamber door, "only this and nothing more." Ah, distinctly I remember it was in the bleak December, and each separate dying ember wrought its ghost upon the floor. Eagerly I wished the morrow, vainly I had sought to borrow from my books surcease of sorrow for the lost Lenore, for the rare and radiant maiden whom the angels name Lenore, nameless here forevermore. And the silken, sad, uncertain rustling of each purple curtain thrilled me, filled me with fantastic terrors never felt before, so that now to still the beating of my heart I stood repeating, "'Tis some visitor entreating entrance at my chamber door. Some late visitor entreating entrance at my chamber door. This it is, and nothing more." Presently my soul grew stronger, hesitating then no longer. "Sir," said I, "or madam, truly your forgiveness I implore. But the fact is I was napping, and so gently you came rapping, and so faintly you came tapping at my chamber door, that I scarce was sure I heard you. Here I opened wide the door. Darkness there, and nothing more." So you could treat this as a story, and you could use all the stuff we talked about in quarter one, where there's a protagonist and a conflict, and our guy is alone at night, and we get the sense that he's always alone at night. He's not expecting anyone to show up, but someone does and knocks at the door, and he says the thing we all say when some inconvenience shows up: "Well, maybe I'll just do nothing and it'll go away." But it doesn't, and after a little bit of gathering his courage, he goes up, opens the door, and there's no one. And as we'll see in the poem, and as you may have guessed from the title, there's a raven, and it talks to him, and he loses his mind with grief for the lost Lenore, who is mentioned early on, and we hear more about later, someone who the narrator, or when it's a poem, you call it the speaker, loved, and kind of imagines maybe her ghost is appearing, or maybe the devil is tempting him with intimations of her ghost appearing, and all of that sort of pushes him over the edge in this dark night. Now, we're not going to look so much at the story side of things, and we're going to talk more about the poetic devices. So what I have as your activity today is I'm going to post a list of 10 things, and we're going to look for them. I have some posters in the room covering this vocab, and I've mentioned them all before, so these won't be new, but let's take a little overview. The first couple are rhymes. You have a couple different kinds of rhymes. We can say end rhyme is when the end of a line rhymes with the end of another. So we got like floor and Lenore. Okay, they're not always right next to each other. They're usually 2 or 3 away in most forms of poems that we're going to see. Now, that is a perfect one, floor and Lenore, but it's often, the consonants match and the vowel doesn't, or the vowel matches and the consonants doesn't, and that's okay. It doesn't have to be perfect every time. Now, the other one you'll see, especially in this poem, is internal rhyme, which is anything else. So you might have like the middle of a line rhyme with the end of that same line, morrow and borrow, or you might have the middle of a line rhyme with the middle of another line, morrow and sorrow. And you could also just have 2 words right next to each other, like here we've got rapping, but sometimes you've got napping, tapping, and other moments where it like says a word and then echoes it very soon after, not even needing the end of a line or to go into the next or anything like that. We've also got alliteration, which is another sound tool that you use when you're making a poem, and you want it to sound nice. You want it to sound like it's sort of dressed up more than words that we just think of off the top of our head. We want to make it arranged, like if you see a chef using tweezers to put the perfect garnish on a cake or something, you might say, "And the silken, sad, uncertain rustling of the purple curtain." You've got a lot of S or C sounds coming right after the other, which that one does two things. One is it makes them all connected. It makes it feel like they are matching, like when you dress up and your belt matches your shoes. It just looks nicer, and it makes things feel like the author had a plan and it wasn't just thrown together. But it also, and sometimes that can be used to like take two things that are opposites and hint at a connection, like the prince and the pauper or something. But in this line, it does another thing, which is, if you look at the word rustling, you might classify that as onomatopoeia, right? It's a sound in terms of the meaning, and it's a sound in terms of the pronunciation, and those play off each other and they do the same job. So often when you think of onomatopoeia, you think of bang, pow, snicked. Whenever you're reading a comic book and Wolverine gets his claws out, it says snicked in big letters. But there's another thing, which is all these guys do that as well. Silken does not mean anything to do with the sound. Sad, uncertain, if you look those up, you won't mention anything about curtains rustling. But when you say them all in a row, it creates the effect. And sometimes this could be called like indirect onomatopoeia or something, but you don't have to worry about the fancy terms. You just know that whenever you put a sound in there, it takes on a life of its own. It's like, that's what the curtain sounds like, and those words have their meaning and they have their sound, and they're both there. Even if you picked it for one reason, well, the other reason is still present. Okay. Another thing is personification, and we have one big one in this poem, which is the raven itself. You can compare the raven to a human, and you know what? It doesn't stretch that far, right? Because if you're saying it talks, well, a raven can talk. If you're saying it has, it steps into the room, well, a raven can step into the room. And if you think that it has desires and so on, well, it could. And you don't have to push it that far to make it human-like. But you can also do personification with the wall. You could say the wall wants me to lean on it or something. You can take something that's completely not animate at all, not alive at all, and give it whatever qualities would be interesting poetically. So here's an example right here. And each separate dying ember wrought its ghost upon the floor, which is just a wonderful, lovely line. And the embers, you might imagine like there's a fireplace and like little flecks float out. Like you might see a little red, and then it turns black, and then it hits the floor and cools down and turns into like a light gray bit of ash or something. And if you just describe that straightforwardly, it might not be all that cool. But if you say dying ember, we say it's alive, even though it's not really alive when it's on fire. And then it's dying, and then it wrought its ghost. That's so lovely. Wrought is old-fashioned past form of work. And it's like the sound of it feels so, I don't know, flat. It feels like they're sort of nuzzling into the ground in a very soft, not aggressive way at all. And the ghost is describing like the image. It's like, oh, these things fall on the floor. Maybe they leave a little, light gray dusting. But now that you say the word ghost, now it's in the air. and now we're thinking about ghosts. And of course, that's what the poem is about. We're supposed to be curious whether the ghost of Lenore is speaking through the raven. So that's another quality of poems, is that once you say something, it's out there, even if you meant it in one way and it can be taken in another. Poe knew that once he said ghost once, we would be thinking of ghosts, even if subconsciously. So that's the personification. And we also have the terms for different types of stanzas. So like most of the poems we've seen are stanzas of 4, because that's probably the most common. And those are called quatrains. And if you saw that, you would be able to guess, because you know that anything that has Q-U-A-D or Q-U-A-R-T means 4. And these guys are called sestet because there's 6 lines, and every number would have its own name, just like, you know, polygons or something would have octagon, hexagon, whatever. And so that's another vocab term. And we got a couple more, and I don't want to make this video too long, but the idea is that this doc is going to be shared with the class, not a separate one for each person, but everybody's going to look at this doc, and that's why I chose a big poem, so there's lots of room, and a poem with tons and tons of examples. So what I want you guys to do is pick one thing and pick one example of it. So you might say, startled at the stillness. You can go, oh, that's alliteration. And then you can highlight it, comment, and put your comment. And since this is shared by all, you're going to eventually see 20-something comments from the whole class. And you'll see ones that other people noticed that maybe you didn't. Or you could even reply to theirs and be like, actually not sure about this because I think it connects with blah, blah, blah. And, you know, nicely, don't furiously argue, but you can wonder. You can be like, oh, this is a metaphor, but I actually think it's personification. And that's the idea. I'll do a couple examples, and you can use this to practice looking for some of these terms. Thanks.